Howdy, and thanks for stopping by today so that we can talk a little bit about Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which represented his first attempt to redefine the Civil War. Now, before we get to the Emancipation Proclamation, we need to establish what was going on beforehand. The Civil War started off for Lincoln as a very limited war. His aim was to preserve the Union. Keep in mind, everything else is secondary. When it comes down to it, throughout the Civil War, Lincoln has one goal that remains constant, and that is to preserve the Union. Now, Lincoln really had no idea what he was getting into at the time. In fact, when his War Department called for troops, they called for 75,000 troops to serve for a period of 3 months, if we even need them that long. Lincoln wasn't aware this war was going to last 4 years, much longer than he expected. Over 600,000 lives are going to be taken in this war. Lincoln had no idea. For him at the time, it was just about putting the Union back together. But putting the Union back together was going to prove to be a much more difficult task than Lincoln had imagined at first. The North had a three-pronged strategy for victory, which was known as the Anaconda Plan. What the North had in mind to do was to first blockade Confederate ports. Second, divide the Confederacy at the Mississippi and establish that river as a channel for northern commerce. Third was the kicker, to capture Richmond, the Confederate capital. Now, it doesn't seem like capturing Richmond would be the hardest of these things. After all, it's barely a stone's throw away from Washington, D.C. But in 1862, Lincoln's generals in Virginia run into a man named Robert E. Lee, who lays multiple whippings on the Union armies, so much so that he gets confident enough to invade the North, where he engages his opponent, General McClellan, in what is really, for all practical purposes, an inconclusive battle at Antietam. Now, let's take a look at this Battle of Antietam. Antietam has the distinction of being the bloodiest single day of the Civil War. Gettysburg was a bloodier battle, but that lasted 3 days. So on no other day in U.S. history has more American blood been spilled. Over 20,000 killed, wounded, captured, and missing. The battle itself was a tactical draw, with neither side destroying the other, both armies being largely intact by the end, and Lee going on an orderly retreat. Now, the North can claim victory very easily because, of course, the North had the battlefield. Then again, when two teams play basketball, the away team always goes home after the game. Doesn't always mean the away team lost. Lincoln realizes that McClellan had failed to deliver at Antietam. He couldn't be fooled. One of the first things Lincoln did after the battle was to fire his commanding general. Lincoln was not impressed with the results, but the Republican press was. If you look here, you can see a picture from Harper's Weekly of General McClellan going into Frederick, Maryland, and seeing all these crowds. He's liberated the city. So although it may not be a real victory, with a little bit of PR and spin, we could do something with it. And so Lincoln has an opportunity here. This war has been going on for more than a year now, much longer than Lincoln ever anticipated. And keep in mind, although the North is doing well in the Western theater, it's starting to look like the North is never going to be able to defeat Lee and take Virginia. Lincoln can no longer fight this war with a hand tied behind his back. It's time for something drastic if the Confederacy is to be defeated and the Union is going to be preserved. So, is Antietam a chance for Lincoln to redefine the war? Perhaps to make this war about preserving the Union and ending slavery? Well, as much as Lincoln might have wanted to end slavery personally, Lincoln, as President of the United States, had a lot of factors to consider. By the way, Abraham Lincoln may have been the greatest politician ever to occupy the Oval Office. And Lincoln has a number of political concerns in mind, and three things in particular that are barriers to emancipation. The first of these being the Constitution. I always keep one close. Didn't even realize that one was there, but it is. Constitution of the United States, which, prior to the introduction of the 13th Amendment in 1865, did not allow the federal government to legislate concerning slavery in the several states. Lincoln had no constitutional authority to end slavery. The second thing in Lincoln's way was the border states. Were the border states? Was the border states? I don't know. If I've got a grammar Nazi out there, comment. Let me know which one. Okay, but the border states were in the way of emancipation. Because keep in mind, the Civil War wasn't just as easy as, okay, slave states to the Confederacy, free states to the Union, let's all fight each other. Most of the slave states seceded, but you had these border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, that had remained in the Union and continued to have slavery. And if Lincoln is going to turn this war into a war about emancipation, he's going to tick a lot of people off in these places, and he has to consider that. Wouldn't want Kentucky joining the Confederacy or anything like that. Now, the third thing in Lincoln's way would be his central goal of preserving the Union. If Lincoln expands the aim of this war and gives the message to the South that if you are defeated, slavery is also defeated, this is going to make the South fight even harder. Possibly will make it more difficult to win. But as Lincoln is seeing it at this point in time, the North is not winning. That's something to keep in mind, that with all of the victories that Robert E. Lee's scoring, victory was not certain for the North, in spite of all of the advantages that they started out with population, equipment, and money. Lincoln had to be really careful about this because he had to walk a fine line, because on one hand, he had the abolitionist wing of his own party, the more radical faction that wanted to see the war escalated. And then on the other end, there were plenty of people in the North who did not want the war to be about slavery. So when Abraham Lincoln was confronted by members of his own party in a Northern newspaper about not doing enough to end slavery, Lincoln replied in a public letter to Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune, where he explained his position on the war and slavery. Let's see what Honest Abe has to say. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save this Union. Lincoln's trying to make himself very clear in this letter to the editor. This is a war for one thing and one thing only, to preserve the Union. Now, Honest Abe's not being quite so honest here, because this is exactly 1 month before the Emancipation Proclamation, and Lincoln's already got this thing in his desk drawer. He's just waiting for the right time to release it. And he needs to let these border states know that this is not going to threaten you.
A gun can save your life, or it can put you in jail for life. Hi, my name is Tim Schmidt.
So after the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln sees his chance. We've got something resembling a victory. Robert E. Lee has come across Yankee troops on the field and has not decisively defeated them. So maybe it's time for at least a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This was issued on September 22nd of 1862, 100 days before the new year, 5 days after the Battle of Antietam. And Abraham Lincoln in this proclamation wrote, that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. So it's September 22nd right now. I'm going to give you 100 days, South. And if you're still fighting in 100 days, I'm going to start freeing your slaves. Now, the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation could be read as a warning to the South. Look here, South. I'm tired of your nonsense, and you better put the guns down, or else it's about to get real. And note the date here, January 1st, 1863. Now, keep in mind that Lincoln, more than anything, would like the Union to be preserved and the war to be over. So there's something about this date that helps me to remember it. First of all, come on, it's New Year's. It shouldn't be that hard. But I think about when I was little and my parents would start counting to 3. You may remember this. The finger goes up. 1. I stand my ground, wondering, will she keep counting? 2. I'm starting to wonder now. Okay, I'm getting ready to run off and do what I'm told, but I think I'm going to wait because I was a stubborn kid. And I think that maybe she'll pull up that 2.5. And then it's time to stop running because I didn't want to get spanking. I mean, I was growing up in the 80s, back when you could actually do that. So Lincoln is really counting to 3 for the South. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 1863, then he's going to start freeing slaves. Now, of course, 1/1/1863, I know that it's a 1 and a 1, but 1 + 1 = 2. Look, if you have a better memory device, use that, but I doubt that you do. So on January 1st, 1863, this war is going to change. Now, by what authority is Lincoln freeing slaves? As we've noted, the Constitution at the time did not give Lincoln the authority to free slaves in a slave state. But Lincoln writes in the Emancipation Proclamation that he is doing this by the power vested in him as Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion. So when it comes down to it, this Emancipation Proclamation is a necessary war measure. Lincoln is saying, look, as Commander-in-Chief, I'm in charge of suppressing this rebellion. And if I don't start freeing slaves, the Union cause is in jeopardy. So I'm doing this not because I want to, but because I have to. Of course, there are exceptions, because Lincoln is not freeing slaves everywhere. As you can see here, he's noting that all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be free. So there's a prerequisite for any slaves to be freed that this place has to be in rebellion against the United States. So let's take a look at our map. You can see here the areas covered and the areas not covered. Now, of course, you've got the border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, soon to be West Virginia, a state that was created during the Civil War. Now, then let's take a look at the Confederacy. Notice that the entire state of Tennessee is exempted. This is because the state of Tennessee has already been pacified and is being occupied by Union troops at the time. Note that the Union has also taken New Orleans. So southeast Louisiana is also not covered by the Emancipation Proclamation. And we also have a few counties in Tidewater, Virginia, that were occupied by the Union Army at the time. So wherever the Union is, the Emancipation Proclamation is not. And wherever the Union is not, the Emancipation Proclamation is. So strictly speaking, On January 1st, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, 0 slaves were freed. Well, then what's the big deal? Why are we even talking about this if the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free a single slave? Well, it didn't free a single slave that day. But as time progressed and the Union Army went further into the Confederate territory, the Emancipation would be read every time the Union Army went to another slave plantation. By the way, slaves, you're free. And so this further destabilizes the Confederacy. So while no slaves were freed on that day, plenty of slaves were freed over the next 2.5 years. So as far as why, first of all, it destabilizes the Confederacy. But second of all, the Emancipation Proclamation strengthened the Union's moral cause. Let's see how Abraham Lincoln closed this Emancipation Proclamation. He did so by writing, "And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God." The gracious favor of Almighty God for an act of justice. Lincoln here is making it clear that from this point forward, this is not just a war to subjugate the South and keep them from being independent. The North has the moral high ground because the North is fighting against slavery. Now, while slavery was popular in the American South, it wasn't popular in the European countries that the South was trying to get to assist them. So when Jefferson Davis's government goes over to England and says, "Hey, England, we'd like a little help from you," the English have to say, "Sorry, as much as we would like to, we can't help you. Our people just don't like slavery so much. And if this war is about slavery, we can't get on the wrong side of that." Now, I'm a historian. I know that Queen Elizabeth wasn't Queen of England in the 19th century, but would you rather see a picture of Queen Victoria? See, sometimes aesthetics matter. Keep that in mind. And finally, in addition to destabilizing the Confederacy and giving the North the moral high ground and keeping foreign powers from getting involved on the side of the Confederacy, the Emancipation Proclamation paved the way for the formation of African American military units. About 180,000 African American soldiers ended up serving in the Union Army during the Civil War. So before the Emancipation Proclamation, the North was fighting a limited war to preserve the Union. After the Emancipation Proclamation, the North is fighting a war to preserve the Union and to eradicate slavery. So Lincoln has not changed his war aim. He has expanded his war aim. And from that point on, we will see the progression toward, in 1865, the 13th Amendment, and the Civil War ending and slavery ending with it. And of course, you're more than welcome to check out my website. Follow me on Twitter. I'm all over the place. Feel free to join me. Until next time.
TomRitchie.net. The video's from February 3rd, 2013. Now let's go watch Trump from today.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by saying we've just closed out another month of stock market. We're the best stock market Dow in 36 years. That's very impressive. So people are very happy with their 401ks and with the stocks that they have, and that's a tremendous achievement. Best in 36 years. Let me begin with a brief update on the China virus. Over the last month, our new cases in the United States have declined by 38%. Last week, we announced a breakthrough in testing that will allow us to have over 150 million rapid point-of-care tests. These tests return the results in less than 15 minutes, and many will be deployed to nursing homes. We're focusing very strongly on nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and other locations that serve high-risk populations. So we're going to have the 15-minute and less tests, and we will have 150 million rapid point-of-care tests. That's something. This evening, I'm pleased to announce that AstraZeneca vaccine has reached phase 3 clinical trials. So that's joining another group of vaccines that are very close to the end and hopefully approval. In the United States, we're doing things that nobody thought would have been even possible. This is a process that would have taken, in some cases, years, and we did it in a matter of months. Thanks to the efforts of Operation Warp Speed, we remain on track to deliver a vaccine very rapidly in record time. I also want to provide an update on left-wing political violence that we're seeing in Democrat-run cities. Under my administration, federal law enforcement is working with state and local authorities all over the country to comb through hours of video, track down rioters, looters, and arsonists, and bring them to justice. We've just come up with a report that we've arrested a large number of people. It's over 200. And you'll be hearing about that, but they've been arrested in various cities throughout the United States. We're doing it very low-key, but we're trying to help cities. They are, in all cases, Democrat-run, but we're doing the best we can to help them without really much of a consent. We'd like to have the consent. As an example, in Portland, we could solve that problem in approximately 1 hour, but the mayor refuses, perhaps for political reasons. I don't know why it's good for him to have a city that's falling apart and that's under siege now for 94 days. But really, it's been under siege for years, if you know Portland. So to the mayor, I say, whenever you're ready, let us know. We'll solve your problem of violence. We'll solve your problem of crime. We'll arrest those criminals very rapidly, and you'll be able to have some nice evenings in Portland. The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice are announcing a joint operations center to investigate the violent left-wing civil unrest. And again, in Portland alone, the federal government has already taken care of and arrested 100 rioters. Just in that one city, the wave of violence and destruction that we've seen in recent weeks and months has occurred in cities exclusively controlled and dominated by the Joe Biden party. If you take a look, the top 10 in the country are Democrats. It's Democrat-run cities, and it's a shame, and it can be solved so easy. It can be solved very easily. The violence is fueled by dangerous rhetoric from far-left politicians that demonize our nation and demonize our police. We have to allow our police to do what they're very good at doing. We've taken that power away. They're afraid to lose their pension, their job, their everything. They're afraid to be destroyed. You saw this when left-wing extremists attacked law-abiding citizens attending the Republican National Convention at the White House, including Senator Rand Paul and his wonderful wife, Kelly, what they went through, but other people went through it too. And that was done very systematically. That was done on purpose. They knew we were having the convention, and they wanted to do everything they could to disrupt it. And the good news is the public is very wise to it. They see what's happening, and they're wise to it. And I think they are probably acting accordingly. Left-wing rioters are repeating the same false narrative about America that you hear about. You hear this from people, what they're saying, how they're saying it, the violence. It's terrible. And again, it's Democrat politicians. I don't know that they're spurring it on or they're afraid to stop it. But in any event, we're there to help. We're there to get things under control. What they did on Thursday night at the White House, just outside of the White House, to people that came from all over the world is a disgrace. It's a disgrace. And frankly, the mayor, Democrat Mayor Bowser, should have done a better job. She did a very poor job. But at the same time, we had the police were very brave. They helped Rand. I guess it started off with 2, and they took a beating. If you can believe this, they really took some heavy hits. 1 went down. but got right up, and two others joined them, and they were able to get Rand and Kelly through. But it was a terrible, terrible thing to witness. But other people went through similar, not to the extent in terms of taping. We don't have the tapes as strong, but some people went through, from what I heard, as bad or worse. The violent rioters share Biden's same talking points, and they share his same agenda for our nation. And even his strange speech today that he made in Pittsburgh, he didn't mention the fact, and he didn't mention the far left. He didn't mention the far left, or for what I saw, I don't believe he mentioned the word Antifa. Antifa is a criminal organization, and he didn't mention Antifa thugs, but mostly seemed to blame the police and law enforcement. He went on point after point after point. He even talked about those on the right, but he didn't talk about those on the left, and those on the left are the problem, and Antifa is the problem. The rioters and Joe Biden have a side. They're both on the side of the radical left, and that is so obvious. And until that neutralizes, you're never going to have safe areas in those Democrat-run areas. For months, Joe Biden has given moral aid and comfort to the vandals, repeating the monstrous lie that these were peaceful protests. They're not peaceful protests. That's anarchy. That's you look at the agitators, you look at the looters, you look at the rioters. That's not a peaceful protest. They keep using the term. It's so nice, peaceful protest. And behind the reporter, the cities are burning. We could solve it very quickly if they ask us to come in, like we did in Minneapolis and like we just did in Wisconsin, where I'll be going tomorrow. And at least the governor asked me if I could, we would, I said, you got to get the National Guard. And he finally agreed to even a small number, but they were able to take care of things. And that was about 5 days ago, 6 days ago. And ever since, it's been very good. 13 members of Biden's campaign staff donated to bail and rioters. They're getting him out of jail, looters. They got him out of jail. And his running mate, Kamala, urged their supporters to do the same thing. It's outrageous that they're now seeking to shift the blame for the mayhem. And they really want to put it on the backs of the police. I see it. The police there's just a war on law enforcement in this country, and without law enforcement, we wouldn't have a country. We have very talented people. They're not allowed to do their job. If you give the radical left power, what you're seeing in the Democrat-run cities will be brought to every city in this country. If they have that power, every city in this country could be potentially another Portland or another Chicago where they've had such problems. To defeat them, we must jail lawbreakers, and we must defeat their hateful ideology about this country, about America. We must teach our children that America is an exceptional, free, and just nation worth defending, preserving, and protecting. And that's what we want to do. They want to destroy our country. They're going to destroy our suburbs. But I think I've gone a long way from allowing that to happen. The suburbs are protected, especially with the rule changes that I made. I took them out of the Obama administration. They were going to be made much worse. What we're witnessing today is a result of left-wing indoctrination in our nation's schools and universities. Many young Americans have been fed lies about America being a wicked nation plagued by racism. Indeed, Joe Biden and his party spent their entire convention spreading this hateful and destructive message while refusing to say one word about the violence. They didn't even discuss law enforcement, the police. Those words weren't mentioned. Two words that were taken out were the words under God, two very important words in the Pledge of Allegiance in their caucus. I guess they did it twice. They took it out of their Pledge of Allegiance. I heard it the one time and I said, that's strange. That's a big change. I figured they maybe made a mistake. Something happened. No, they didn't make a mistake. Then they did it later on. So they took the word, essentially, they took the word God out of the Pledge of Allegiance. We're not taking the word God out of anything. We're not taking it out of our Pledge of Allegiance, and we're not taking the great word God out of anything. At our convention, we highlighted law enforcement heroes and repeatedly emphasized that violence has no place in American political discourse. The left's war on police, faith, history, and American values is tearing our country apart, which is what they want. They think it's good, but it's gotten out of control. They're unable to control this radical left crazy movement, but we can control it very quickly, very, very quickly indeed. The only path to unity is to rebuild a shared national identity focused on common American values and virtues, of which we have plenty. This includes restoring patriotic education in our nation's schools, where they're trying to change everything that we've learned. What we've learned, in fact, what most of you have learned, they want to change it. They want to change it for whatever reason. Cancel culture, whatever you want to call it. At the same time, we must strictly and fully enforce our law and have no tolerance for anarchy and no tolerance, zero, for violence. Anyone who breaks the law should be arrested, prosecuted, and punished. This includes targeting law enforcement efforts to focus on Antifa, the left-wing domestic terror organization. The mission of Antifa is to spread terror in the U.S. population with the goal of getting Americans to give up to their agenda. This is how terrorist organizations have always operated. Biden won't even say the name Antifa. I don't believe he said it today. He made a speech and he didn't mention that. He mentioned others, but he didn't mention Antifa. He mentioned law enforcement and mentioned the police, and but he didn't mention Antifa. I wonder why. And if he cannot name the problem, there's no way that he'll solve the problem. You don't name it, you don't solve it. In fact, Biden would give Antifa exactly what it wants, the far left policy agenda it's asking for. And if that happened, we don't have much of a country left. If you give violent extremists what they want, the violence doesn't go away. They gain new power to spread the terror nationwide. Most of our nation is extremely safe, by the way. You know, you only see the bad. You see Portland and Chicago, and you see what's happened in New York just in a very short period of time. It's horrible what's happened in New York. I love New York. I come from New York. And when I see, 4 years ago I left, and I could see that it was problems under this mayor. He's a terrible mayor, one of the worst. I can't say the worst. I mean, I've witnessed Portland. Hard to top him. But he's certainly one of the worst. And when I look at what's happening in New York and I look at what's happening in the city, and so quickly, it happened so quickly, it's a shame. Biden's strategy is to surrender to the left-wing mob, which is exactly what he's doing. I don't think he even knows what he's doing, and give them control over every lever of power in the United States government. But when you surrender to the mob, you don't get freedom, you get fascism. That's what happens in all cases. You take a look at Venezuela, look what's gone on there and other places. Biden is using mafia talking points. The mob will leave you alone if you give them what you want. That's what it is. The mob will leave you alone, give them what you want, but it doesn't work that way, because once you give them, they keep taking. What happens is you give and give and give and you take, and they no longer respect you. And that's what's happened with the Democrats, because I actually think they've lost control of these radical left maniacs. I think they've lost control because I don't think they feel that's helping them when New York and Chicago and Portland and you look at Oakland and you look at Baltimore and you look at so many different places. And what's going on there, the top 10 are all run by Democrats. And you can go a lot further down the list than 10. In America, we will never surrender to mob rule, because if the mob rules, democracy is indeed dead. The reason we're continuing to see violence in left-wing cities today is that liberal politicians, mayors, prosecutors, and judges are refusing to enforce the law and put the rioters in jail. These are rioters. These are dangerous people. These are killers. They kill a lot of people. And they don't even think about it. They wake up the next morning. They don't even think about it. This is the extreme left's agenda for America. They want to appoint radical prosecutors, judges, and federal officials who will set criminals free. Their stated plan is to cut police funding, abolish cash bail, close down prisons, re-educate our children, preach left-wing social justice, establish a national sanctuary for criminal illegal aliens, and abolish the death penalty, even for cop killers. No one will be safe, and in fact, they want very much to let people in prison, like as an example, the Boston bomber. They want to let everybody vote. If you're in prison, if you're the Boston bomber, they want you to have a vote. I don't know. I don't think that sells too well. My administration is a very different approach. We want states to work with us to deploy the National Guard to quell the unrest. All they have to do is call us. We will have the National Guard. We're prepared. We're ready to go no matter where they may call from. Any part of the country, East Coast, West Coast, doesn't matter. We're ready to move immediately, as we did in Minneapolis, as we did. We are ready to move as quickly as you can imagine. Tomorrow I'm going to a place where we move very quickly. You know that, in Wisconsin, and we move very, very quickly. And as soon as we moved, that was the end of that. It was very well behaved. I'll appoint more tough-on-crime prosecutors, support stiffer penalties and longer jail terms for riders, and support effective policing methods that are proven to be great crime reducers. When you enforce the law, order follows, and we need order. We need order. You can't have cities run like these cities are run. They gave a little, then they gave a little, then they gave a little more, and all of a sudden they've lost these cities. But I'll get them back very quickly. All they have to do is say, please come in. As you know, they have to ask, unless we go a much tougher route, which we could, but you don't like to do that. They have to ask you to come in. When they ask me to come in, we'll be there within a matter of minutes. When I signed the executive order outlining 10-year prison sentences as an example for destroying monuments and statues, it immediately stopped. That was 3 months ago or so. I signed an order, and it said 10 years in prison. 10 years if you knock down a statue. It immediately stopped. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen it happening for about that time. They were going to have a big march on Washington. They canceled that march. They said 10 years is too long. Before the outbreak of left-wing extremism, our strategy produced a historic reduction in violent crime. In the last 2 years of the Obama administration, murder increased 30% in major American cities, and we witnessed the largest 2-year nationwide increase in murder in over a half a century. In the first 2 years of my presidency, the number of murders went down significantly. Earlier this year, we announced that Operation Legend, surging federal law enforcement to cities plagued by violent crime, and we did a lot of it. We did a lot of it very quietly, but we did a lot. Since the beginning of Operation Legend, we have conducted more than 1,000 arrests and reduced the murder rate in Kansas City, which is one of the cities we targeted, by 1/3. Cut it down 33%. In the last month alone, we cut the murder rate in Chicago in half. People don't know that, but we sent them in to Chicago without fanfare at all, but we cut it down in half. It's still far too high. And if they'd asked for full help, as opposed to just sending in some very talented people, we'd be able to cut it down to a very low number. While I am president, we will defend the rights of law-abiding citizens. We will honor the heroes who keep America safe, and we do. We honor our police. We honor our law enforcement. I have the privilege of having gotten, I guess, most every law enforcement group in the country that I can think of. The sheriffs in Florida, all of them. Law enforcement, Ohio and Texas, North Carolina. I mean, almost no matter where you look, I think I've gotten all of it. We'll have to do a little study so I'm totally accurate, but I would say all of it. And the ones who didn't, I think we have to look at them. Where do they come from? So we've done a real job. We're ready, willing, and able to help these Democrat-run cities that are doing poorly. They have to call and ask. All they have to do is call. They don't even have to put it in writing. We'll put it in writing later. We'll get them in there, and we'll straighten out the city very quickly, whichever city we may be talking about. So those governors that are responsible for a state that has a city that's got a lot of problems, call me, or the mayor can call me, and we'll be there very quickly. Tomorrow we're making that trip to Wisconsin. I think a lot of you are going to be going, and it should be very interesting. Should be very interesting, but we're proud of it because in 6 days, it's been like a different world. And it took place immediately. As soon as we surged, as soon as we went in, it took place immediately. Okay, please. Thank you.
Mr. President, are you giving any consideration, or did you give any consideration to the governor and mayor's request not to come to Kenosha tomorrow?
No, because Kenosha was something we did a good job on. The governor didn't want us there. He didn't want the National Guard, as you know. He was very reluctant, but I give him credit because ultimately he said yes. And as soon as he said yes, the problem ended. But I have to see the people that did such a good job for me, and we're meeting with numerous people, and we have tremendous support in the state of Wisconsin. So I promise them when it all gets taken care of, we'll go.
Concerns, though, that it could exacerbate tensions and increase violence. Do you give any consideration
Well,
to
it
that?
could also increase enthusiasm, and it could increase love and respect for our country. And that's why I'm going, because they did a fantastic job. As soon as I called and told them, let's go, the whole problem stopped. That was, 6 days ago? Yeah, Jeff?
Mr. President, why are you not meeting with the family of Jacob Blake while you're there?
Well, I spoke with the pastor, wonderful man, the family's pastor, and I thought it would be better not to do anything where there are lawyers involved. They wanted me to speak, but they wanted to have lawyers involved, and I thought that was inappropriate, so I didn't do that. But I did speak with the pastor of the family, who's a fine man, a wonderful man, and I think we had a great talk. And I may at some point, do that, but they did have a lawyer that wanted to be on the phone, and I said, no, that's inappropriate, but I just gave my best regards. But again, I spoke with the pastor. Yeah, please.
I have a question on coronavirus, but first, you were just criticizing Joe Biden, saying he didn't mention the far left or Antifa during his speech today. You said you wanted to talk about left-wing political violence, but I noticed you did not mention that your supporters were also in Portland this weekend, firing paintball guns at people, some form of pepper spray. So do you want to also take this chance to condemn what your supporters did?
Well, I understand they had large numbers of people that were supporters, but that was a peaceful protest. And paint is a defensive mechanism. Paint is not bullets. Your supporters, and they are your supporters indeed, shot a young gentleman who and killed him, not with paint, but with a bullet. And I think it's disgraceful. These people, they protested peacefully. They went in very peacefully. And I'll tell you what they're protesting. They're protesting when they turn on television or read whatever they may be reading, and they see a city like Chicago was involved, and I thought that was inappropriate, so I didn't do that. But I didn't want us there. He didn't want the National Guard, as you know. He was very reluctant, but I give him credit because ultimately he said yes, and as soon as he said yes, the problem ended. But I have to see the people that did such a good job for me, and we're meeting with numerous people, and we have tremendous support in the state of Wisconsin. So I promise them when it all gets taken care of, we'll go.
Concerns, though, that it could exacerbate tensions and increase violence. Do you give any consideration
Well,
to
it
that?
could also increase enthusiasm, and it could increase love and respect for our country. And that's why I'm going, because they did a fantastic job. As soon as I called and told them, let's go, the whole problem stopped. That was, 6 days ago? Yeah, Jeff?
Mr. President, why are you not meeting with the family of Jacob Blake while you're there?
Well, I spoke with the pastor, wonderful man, the family's pastor, and I thought it would be better not to do anything where there are lawyers involved. They wanted me to speak, but they wanted to have lawyers involved, and I thought that was inappropriate, so I didn't do that. But I did speak with the pastor of the family, who's a fine man, a wonderful man, and I think we had a great talk. And I may at some point, do that, but they did have a lawyer that wanted to be on the phone, and I said, no, that's inappropriate, but I just gave my best regards. But again, I spoke with the pastor. Yeah, please.
I have a question on coronavirus, but first, you were just criticizing Joe Biden, saying he didn't mention the far left or Antifa during his speech today. You said you wanted to talk about left-wing political violence, but I noticed you did not mention that your supporters were also in Portland this weekend, firing paintball guns at people, some form of pepper spray. So do you want to also take this chance to condemn what your supporters did?
Well, I understand they had large numbers of people that were supporters, but that was a peaceful protest. And paint is a defensive mechanism. Paint is not bullets. your supporters, and they are your supporters indeed, shot a young gentleman who and killed him.